Happy Saturday. It is November 16th, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
Well, Trump has made quite a few cabinet appointments this week, leading some of us to continue stress eating peanut butter M&Ms. Matt Gaetz, the former House representative from Florida, who famously brought a right-wing Holocaust denier to the State of the Union address, is especially perplexing. It was not that long ago that he was under investigation by the House Ethics Committee amidst allegations of sexual misconduct involving minors. There was also some illicit drug use discussed. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the Times of London has reported that should Trump withdraw U.S. aid and military assistance, President Vladimir Zelensky could be within months from building a nuclear bomb. And on that note, Michael, as always, airmail is the antidote to all of that.
It is, and we've got, as you note, a great issue and a fun show today. First, Sean Diddy Combs has been in the news a lot for his arrest on sex trafficking charges. And this week, our writer, Legs McNeil, has some amazing reporting about the murder of a man known as Pretty Boy Melvin Combs, who was Diddy's father. As Legs reports, Pretty Boy Melvin, who had links to the drug kingpin Frank Lucas, was gunned down in 1972 and may have been killed by New York City's Gambino crime family for being a snitch. You'll want to hear this. Then, in a world where it seems you increasingly can't count on anything, here's a shocker. How is it that the residents of London are facing a shortage of drinking water? Well, Jonathan Margolis will join us with his report on how the country's biggest water company turned a foolproof monopoly into a $20 billion money pit. Then, despite the troubles with water in London, there's one thing you can count on in that city: great bookstores such as Haywood Hills, which has been a fixture in Mayfair for almost 90 years and was also reportedly Queen Elizabeth's favorite bookstore. And it's also the most spy-centric bookstore on Earth, and even was name-checked by John le Carré in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This year, it started a new subscription service for lovers of all things espionage, and we'll have Nikki Dunn, a man who runs the shop, in for a debrief on what you can expect. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Well, there's been a story on the front page of newspapers all over the world for the past few weeks. It concerns the allegations against Sean Combs, one of the biggest success stories in the music and entertainment worlds of the last, 30 years. And Lex McNeil has an intriguing insight into his backstory today with some incredible intelligence, really, about his father, Melvin Combs, who died in 1972, that may or may not help explain a little bit of what we are seeing now. Legs is a co-author of Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk, as well as The Other Hollywood, The Uncensored Oral History of the Porn Film Industry, and many other things we love to read. Welcome, Legs.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Legs, one of the things I love about working at Airmail and reading Airmail stories is that I discover something new about a topic I thought I had been following exhaustively. And in this case, it is the story of Sean Combs, who's been a front page fixture for weeks, months at this point, due to all of the arrests?
About 3 weeks, I'd say so far.
It feels like an eternity, but you have unearthed the most fascinating story of his father, Melvin Combs, who died in 1972. Tell us everything you know. Take us back. And first of all, who was Melvin Combs? What do we know? Or what did we know until recently?
I didn't know any of this until I was doing this film called Pusherman, Frank Lucas and the True Story of the Making of American Gangster, with Mark Jacobson, who wrote the original story, The Return of Superfly, for New York Magazine, who's been a friend of mine for 38 years. And we were almost finished with the film when another friend, Amy Haben, told me that P. Diddy or Puff Daddy or Sean Combs, whichever name you want to use, father got into the heroin business through Frank Lucas. At that point, P. Diddy had just been arrested. And so I went back and, started doing my research, and I saw that Frank was talking about how Melvin Combs was his friend. I don't think Frank Lucas I think everyone wanted to be Frank Lucas's friend, but Melvin Combs, Frank actually considered a friend, and he used to bring Sean Combs over to his house, and Frank Lucas's daughter wouldn't let Sean Combs play on the rocking horse. She would push him off, so there would be a little scuffle, and Melvin and Frank thought that was kind of funny,
So, Legs, to the uninitiated, Frank Lucas was a notorious drug lord in New York City, primarily active right in the late 60s and early 70s when Sean Combs was a baby. Tell us a little bit about Frank and his universe.
Frank Lucas was the man who kind of invented black organized crime he didn't want to work with the mafia, who were charging $50,000 a kilo of heroin. So he went directly to the source in Thailand, in Bangkok, and met a Chinese civil servant that he called 007. And he was provided with the 28 mules and 30 guys, and they went up to the Golden Triangle, which is where Burma, which is now called Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand kind of meet in this little section of the territory. And it's called the Golden Triangle because that's where they grow all the poppies for heroin. And he bought his kilos for $4,200 a kilo, as opposed to the mafia's $50,000 or in that range. And Frank Lucas also, through Leslie Ike Atkinson, who was the main supplier in Thailand, a black retired U.S. Army, had an army within an army of black soldiers, and they supplied the heroin in the coffins of dead GIs and shipped it back in military transports. So all this heroin that Frank was buying for $4,200 a key, and he bought, the first time he went, he bought 300 keys, was being smuggled back into the United States in the coffins of dead U.S. GIs returning from Vietnam.
How did Melvin Combs get enmeshed of all of this? And we know that he was friends with Lucas, but how close were their business dealings, or what do we think about their business dealings now?
Frank says that he was the one that got Melvin involved. He fronted him a few keys of his heroin. Apparently Melvin liked dealing in heroin, but he didn't continue with Frank, which is what he should have done. Instead, he got involved with this guy, Willie Abrams, who was connected to the mafia. They were busted. 10 of them were busted. In 71, 72, 10 of them were busted. And they were being supplied by Funzi Siska. And all the rest of them were indicted, but it was thought that Melvin had snitched on them. And he ended up dead on January 26, 1972, off of Central Park West and 110th Street.
What do we know about who killed him?
Well, we think it was Funzi Siska and Angelo Ruggiero, who, of course, was one of the main guys who was responsible for the assassination of Godfather Paul Castellano, who John Gotti killed as he was entering Sparks Steakhouse. So Angelo Ruggiero and Funzi Siska were in the heroin business together.
Frank Lucas, as you note, and that story for listeners at home was dramatized by Denzel Washington in the Ridley Scott film. But when did Sean Combs himself find out how his father died and the circumstances around his life?
His mom, Janice, told him that his father died in a car accident when he was 2 or 3 years old. I believe he was 2 years old. But she told him that he died in a car accident. And it wasn't until he was at Howard University that he said that he Googled his father and found out that he was shot to death in a car off 110th Street and Central Park West. I don't think that Melvin would have gone there to meet with any of the white mobsters because he didn't trust them. No one in Harlem did. Or Willie Abrams, guys who we supposedly snitched on. So I think it was probably a woman that lured him to his death.
And do you think, Legs, that could have something to do with his psychology today and his, I think it's safe to say, mistreatment, even though I know none of the charges have been litigated against him yet?
Alleged mistreatment, but we've all seen the video of him beating his girlfriend. I mean, that was horrifying.
Yeah.
What's interesting about it was there's also a number of boys that have accused him of sexual assault.
How did Sean Combs talk about his father? I mean, in all the many thousands of interviews that he's done over the years.
He said that he decided not to go into drug dealing because his father had been shot, and he realized you either end up in jail or dead. So he decided not to. So instead he, invented this rap empire and merchandising empire and ended up in the same position kind of as his father, only he looks like he's facing a lot of time in jail.
Well, it's such a fascinating story, Legs. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you for the story. It's a stunner, and we should thank you for sharing it with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Just when you think you know absolutely everything there is to know about someone, enter Legs McNeil.
Yeah, terrific reporting and a riveting piece of insight, and I can't wait to see his documentary next year, which is, I'm sure we'll have much more about this. And of course, anything that does develop, we'll be sure and have Legs back here to talk about it.
Michael, let's move on to the United Kingdom, where we have another story of scandal. Jonathan Margolis is here to explain the intricacies of the UK's water supply and how its water company, Thames Water, is at the center of this conversation. Jonathan is Airmail's tech columnist who is based in London and New York and spent 2 decades as a technology writer at the Financial Times. Welcome, Jonathan.
Nice to be here again.
So, Jonathan, as you report in your story, the UK is subject to biblical amounts of rain due to climate change, and yet, for some reason, we're having water shortages. How did we end up in this situation, and how is Thames Water to blame?
The reason we've got water shortages is that although the stuff is coming down in enormous amounts, as you being here will have noticed, it's not like the old kind of friendly drizzle we used to get, that kind of drish, as the Scots call it, throughout the winter, the spring, and the summer and the fall, really. We just get this torrential rain, and there's nowhere for it to go. The drains in the streets are, they go back 100 years and more, and they can't cope with this amount of water. And in common with a lot of other parts of the world, there's much more paving over of grass and wild land. So we've not only got, more roads than we used to have that seal the rain out from going down into the aquifers under London, but there's a fashion, and it's far more than a fashion, it's the norm that people have their front yard paved over to avoid parking nightmares, and they have their backyard paved over so they can have an easy garden to look after. And although it sounds like a trivial thing, apparently this is a mounting problem, that all this water is coming down and it just sits there, or it runs into the Thames. The level of the Thames comes up, it swamps everything, it swamps the sewerage stations, and the whole system is just kind of infrastructure out of date, not working, not according with what we need for climate change.
So, Jonathan, it's a mess, but London finds itself, it seems to me, in a curious state. There's a little villain, every story has a good villain, called Thames Water, which seems to have been, if I understand your reporting, London is one of the few places in the world where it's privatized its water management, right?
No, the whole of England.
The whole of England.
And Wales, actually. Margaret Thatcher, as part of her kind of attempted 30, 40 years ago to make the ordinary citizens masters of their fate, privatized the water in England and Wales.
And Thames Water is the company that oversees London, right?
Yeah. Thames Water is one of several companies across England that are having problems and are having financial problems. But Thames Water is understandably the most seriously afflicted because a quarter of the population of this already quite crowded island is under the aegis of Thames Water. They deal not only with London, but basically the whole of the southeast of the country. The population of that area has gone up dramatically by something like a third over the past 20, 30 years. Climate change has had its effect. There are even things you wouldn't know about, like because of the nature of the geology of London, the water comes down, it's used to seep through the clay, which we're built on this kind of 300-foot deep bowl of clay, but it would seep down there okay. Now it's not seeping so much because of the kind of asphalt and tar and stuff that's been spread around to keep our lives more dry and comfortable and easy to maintain, and of course to serve the king car. The water used to go down into the chalk, which is under the clay bowl. Now this chalk is a massive aquifer that contains trillions of gallons of water. So one of the duties of Thames Water, which is the one we're talking about because it's in the worst trouble and the one about to go bust, is to suck up all this water. It doesn't amount to a lot, but it's enough to flood the tube system. We have this very deep tube, far, far deeper than, say, New York's subway. Some of it is down to, 200 feet under there. And if Thames Water weren't sucking up all the excess water, limited though it is these days, we'd have flooded tube trains and all kinds of other nightmares. So there are a lot of historic duties incumbent upon this company. But when I asked everybody when I was doing the story, people really, not just people commenting in the street, but really, really well versed in the whole story, whether they had any sympathy for Thames Water, the answer was a resounding absolutely not. They've done nothing. They have no interest in London or the southeast of England. They have interest in their shareholders, which is their duty. And of course, 70% of them are foreign. We don't own our own utility, which is kind of bizarre.
But as you know, it's curious. Margaret Thatcher privatizes in 1990s. When she hands it over, this crown jewel, the public good, public health good. It's solvent. Now it finds itself $20 billion in debt, unable to sort of do the most basic updating. So where are the people of London in this? I mean, are they just sort of reduced to Victorian times now?
It would be exaggerated to say it's reduced to Victorian or medieval times. But, I'm just looking over 75 yards to my right. There's the River Thames, it's always been quite a brown river, but it's a whole lot more brown now because there's a lot of, human waste finds its way in there. Last year, the Oxford versus Cambridge boat race, which is a strange kind of antique ritual that Oxford University row against Cambridge University over yonder. And last year, when a lot of the rowers kind of, fell in the water, they went down with quite serious E. coli infections. The water's not great down there. It's not an open sewer or anything like that yet, but it could well be getting that way.
Does Keir Starmer's government he's inherited quite a mess.
He's inherited a mess, and there's already been a suggestion that they might institute some kind of legislation to make all water companies not-for-profit. Now, how that's going to work, I have no idea, and I don't think they have any idea. What occurred to me working on this story the last couple of weeks has been that it's almost part of the human condition not to care about infrastructure. It's long-term. Nobody wants to know about this stuff. And for years, nobody's wanted to know about the sewerage stations not being able to really cope with the increase who wants to know about climate change? Nobody wants to know about climate change. Nobody wants to consider these things. It's long-term stuff that it's very difficult for people to grasp. And who's got the advantage of grasping it? So these companies came in, they saw at the time Thames Water was quite a good investment, a very good investment. Water companies, utilities, although they're kind of boring on the monopoly board, they technically should be a good investment. But most of these companies, I think, most of these investors are going to lose their shirt over it, which is kind of funny in a way, but not good news for anybody.
Well, Jonathan, what a story. Thank you so much.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Well, Michael, water everywhere and not a drop to drink, especially here. The great irony.
I know. Well, got a drought here in New York City as well, so it seems to be problems everywhere.
File this one under problems as well. Finding the perfect gift for the most difficult Scrooge on your list. Help is here. As Stu Heritage reports in the issue this week, Nikki Dunn of Haywood Hill Bookshop here in London has an incredible new offering full of espionage novels that is sure to delight anyone on your list who lives all over the world. Nikki Dunn, the proprietor of Haywood Hill, is here to explain exactly why his shop is so much fun and worth a visit when you are next in London. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
I'm fortunate enough to live in London and to be a regular at your fabulous bookshop. But for those who live all over the world, as many of our listeners do, tell us a little bit about your corner of Mayfair and its history.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you know our shop. Not everybody does. It's a little bit of a hidden gem in the centre of London, but we have got rather a loyal, devoted band of book-loving readers and collectors all over the world who do know about us. Our little shop, it's a quirky survival from the 1930s, set up by a man called George Haywood Hill in 1936, and quickly established itself as a place where you could buy not only the latest books, but also rare books. And that's one of our unique features. We deal in every form of physical books, from the latest publications to the earliest publications, and indeed manuscripts before printed books. So we cover the waterfront. We've been around quite a long time. The place has, as well as creaky floorboards, and we have a lot of literary ghosts knocking about. At least we like to think so. The shop has attracted writers and publishers alongside readers and collectors throughout its history. So it's a nice thought to think of all the people who have come through the door and know the place. One of the most notable who joined the team as a staff member was the English writer Nancy Mitford, who joined just around the middle of the Second World War.
And Nikki, for those who are not fortunate enough to live in London or to be frequent visitors, you also offer a subscription service, or several in fact. Tell us about those.
Because the shop is so small, we wanted to replicate the experience of coming here for those who are unable to get here. The genesis of our subscription service was soon after I joined in 2011, a lady came in and she said, I just wanted to speak to the manager, who happened to be me. She said, I just wanted you to know how incredibly important your shop is to me. She was quite a senior age, and she said that we've been sending a book to her every month or every other month since the 1970s, and that we'd massively changed her life and improved her life. I didn't know anything about this. So I thought that was a wonderful thing and absolutely the purpose of a shop like ours. So we decided to formalize this service, and we gave it a name, which was A Year in Books. And we started to tell people about it. And it has been a wonderful thing that our customers have really responded to, and all over the world. It enables us to really tailor the choice of books to the individual tastes and sensibilities of a reader. It's a very nice concept from my point of view. I really feel like we have a purpose in life to enrich the reading lives of our customers. We're here in Mayfair, this is the way I think of it anyway, and we're like a little literary lighthouse beaming around the world, and literally around the world, as we send books off to individual customers in so many different countries. We have clients in at least every state in the US, for example.
You describe it as a lighthouse. I might call it maybe a safe house in some way, alluding to your sort of latest, more tailored subscription. The new one is Tradecraft, which, as we note in the story this week in the issue, draws on the shop's sort of heritage with spycraft, right? Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, I can. Yeah, it's the espionage community. Our shop has lots of historic ties to that community. I don't want to overstate them, but Mayfair's long been a haunt of spies, and our shop is in the heart of this central London district of Mayfair. And actually on this very same street, which is called Curzon Street, where I'm speaking to you from now, was the headquarters of the domestic British intelligence service, MI5, for very many years. And during that time, that was when John le Carré, or David Cornwall is his real name, was working to some degree in that world. And he kindly referenced our proximity to that world and the fact that the spies would come and buy their books from Hayward Hill by setting a little scene in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy in the bookshop when George Smiley, played by Alec Guinness, who was also a long-standing customer here, came in and bought a book, an antiquarian book, and made a quip about how expensive it was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So in that sense, nothing's changed. And another customer once took me around the corner not far away and showed me where the CIA office was in Mayfair, no longer there because since the move of the US Embassy to the other side of London. And there's quite a few people who had done service both in the British and other government service, intelligence services are customers. And so we're rather fond of that world. Also very fond of the flourishing literary genre of spy books and books about espionage, not just fiction, but also non-fiction. And we thought, given the interest in that genre, given the proximity of our shop to that community over many years, given the seismological shifts in the world, the ever-changing geopolitical background, that we should create a really enjoyable and interesting subscription for people who might want to know more about not just espionage, but about the evolution of the spy novel from its beginnings. Maybe not from right at the beginning, but from the beginning of the 20th century. We're dating our subscription from about 1900. Kim, the Great Game novel, written by Rudyard Kipling, was published in 1901, I think. So that was our starting point. And we've, to sort of publicize what we're doing, we've produced a list of the 50 greatest spy novels published since then, in our opinion. And during that course of the year, you'll experience a journey through espionage writing, or at least our view of some of the best writing. And it's striking, looking at our list, how many very big names published novels with a spy theme over the decades, from Conan Doyle, Conrad, Ian Fleming, of course, Agatha Christie, Graham Greene, Anthony Burgess, Muriel Spark. The list goes on, up to more living writers like Robert Harris and Sebastian Faulks, William Boyd, who's a great contributor to all the things that we do here. And then, of course, very contemporary writers like Mick Herron, Charles Cumming, and many more women writers in the last 20 or 30 years. Although, interestingly, our list there's a real lean towards men in the early decades, but there's always been quite a number of women writers too. So it's an interesting, changing literary genre, as well as a changing geopolitical background, from empire in its beginnings, imperial background to Kim, to in Rachel Kushner's novel, the kind of tensions within contemporary American society as the backdrop.
Well, Mickey, it sounds terrific. Is this one also limited?
This is unlimited. We see a lot of younger people here who are interested in reading contemporary fiction. And I think a lot of the younger generation, I'm in my mid-50s, but people in their 20s and 30s often are very, very up to date in terms of contemporary fiction, but actually haven't read a great deal of the backlist or how we got to where we are now in terms of a literary genre. And I think this could be a really good gift for people to give younger people seeking to understand both geopolitics and how human motivations don't change, but the machinations and the backdrops of spy agencies and indeed individuals can change. It could be rather a fun, eye-opening gift for younger people. That's how I see it anyway.
Well, Nikki, thank you so much. It's an inspired idea, and we love your shop, and I look forward to seeing you very soon in London, and I know Michael is going to make a special trip over here just to browse the newest titles on your shelves.
Please do, Michael. You're both incredibly welcome, and just make sure you ask for me because I might be down in the dungeon, and I'll come up and we can have a chat and a cup of tea and point out what's floating our boat here at the time.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Nikki.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report, our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it, is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, an Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
It is the weekend. I know you've got something you can recommend to us to pass the time. Tell me.
I do. Have you heard of this show called Lioness?
The television show The Lioness or the play The Lioness that was on stage in London last year?
The television show.
I have indeed. Nicole Kidman. Let's discuss.
Exactly. So, speaking of spycraft, and for those of you out there who haven't, everyone is talking about Taylor Sheridan this week, the creator of Yellowstone, that's relaunched. But this is it's season 2 of this show, Lioness, has just launched. It's a good chance to start at season 1. It stars Zoe Saldana, Nicole Kidman, and a woman named Lysala de Oliveira as a female Marine who's recruited to befriend the daughter of Middle Eastern arms dealers so the CIA can take him out. And Saldana plays the CIA operative who trains these female CIA operatives, codenamed Lionesses. I was sort of dubious, Taylor Sheridan, am I being snobby? I got to tell you, Ashley, this is a really great show. It's moody, suspenseful, and surprisingly textured, I think, with characters that you actually kind of end up caring about, even the minor ones, and it kind of makes you realize, I think, how hard it is to sustain these kinds of stories. So Taylor Sheridan, kind of the Dick Wolf of these sweeping sagas, but creating his TV empire. But like I say, I think this is really good, suspenseful. It's a perfect kind of show for right now. A lot of adrenaline, great characters, and it's called Lioness, and it's definitely worth watching, and it's on Paramount Plus. And you, my dear?
First of all, what do you have against Taylor Sheridan?
I don't have anything against Taylor Sheridan.
Hello, this guy was the creator of Yellowstone.
I'm saying some people are a little snobby about him, but no, he's the guy's a machine.
Fine, whatever. All right, well, my recommendation is decidedly different in tone. Have you seen Somebody Somewhere on Max?
I have not. Tell me all about it.
It's a marvelous show. It was inspired by the life of Bridget Everett. She grew up in Manhattan, Kansas, and has dreams of living in Manhattan, New York, which she does go ahead and do. And she plays a character named Sam, who's a singer, who is drawn back to her hometown when she is caring for her sister who's terminally ill. And she ends up creating a new community there and a new life. And it's an incredibly charming and heartwarming show with some great acting, especially from Jeff Hiller. Its 3rd season is out now, and it's just as wonderful as you might expect. And Bridget Everett is such a marvelous performer, and she gives a performance that's just so full of heart. It is the feel-good show we need for these times, although it's not entirely feel-good. I mean, it can be heavy too. If you're like me and you're starting to stop reading the news media after 9 p.m. and you need a way to fill the hours, this is a good way.
Is it get Kansas in the right way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Kansas, so yes, I can say this with some authority. It definitely gets Kansas. She's from Manhattan, which is a city I do not know very well. I'm from Wichita, but I do see a lot of my home state in this show, and it's marvelous. So it's called Somebody Somewhere. It's on Max. We thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a wonderful weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our coders are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. Our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis. And our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thanks again for joining us.